As our kids come to us, the privileges that they have as young children matter.
People will say that Manual struggled because when busing ended, you no longer had affluent white students coming in.
The moment they ended busing, all the resources left.
So many things that I should have already known, I wasn't prepared for.
We can fix the problem.
We are not a post-racial society.
The work is done when you're not talking about a gap.
Major funding for Standing in the Gap provided by the Gates Family Foundation, a Colorado foundation promoting excellence and innovation in Colorado schools since 1946. Daniel and Janet Mordecai Foundation, the Colorado Office of Film, Television, and Media, the Piton Foundation, and Rose Community Foundation. With support from these fine organizations and viewers like you, thank you.
With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
It started in the early 1970s, and Denver was found to have deliberately segregated African American students.
There had not been any black school board members. Rachel was the first.
If we considered all people equal, then there would be excellence at every school.
There's no easy answer to how you close or fix the achievement gap, or it would have been done by now.
The issue of race in education is increasingly a focal point for the Colorado community. The intersection of race, achievement, and poverty has long been a priority for educators, and yet large achievement gaps still exist for students of color. Denver Public Schools, the largest school district in the state, is not only one of the fastest growing in the country, it also has one of the largest achievement gaps. A recent study found the district had the widest economic gaps among 37 large urban districts nationally. As the metro area continues with unprecedented growth, dealing with integration and equity remains a top priority.
I grew up in Denver, Colorado. In Park Hill, there was a lot going on in the neighborhood as far as with gangs and with drugs, and so I kind of had to learn how to be street smart.
I was blessed to grow up in the Park Hill area, so it was when Stapleton Airport was still there. I remember the house still shaking as planes would land, and gang violence really coming up very strong when you come to 1989 and going to the early 90s, and really living in a reality that it was dangerous where you lived, but we didn't necessarily recognize that until we got older and looked back.
Going to school, I didn't have any idea why I was being bused, and it probably wasn't until high school that I learned we were supposed to be bused, and it was the law. I graduated from East High School in 1998. I do feel like I was being tracked. And then from East, I went on to CSU. So many things that I should have already known going into school, going into college, that I wasn't prepared for. Being a parent now and working in the schools, I can see the difference.
The reality for race in America, race in our schools, I think it's definitely prevalent. It's definitely known and understood. The opportunities that are provided to students who may not have a certain socioeconomic status or situation, or who may not come from a particular zip code, their education is different. It shouldn't be, but it's different. And I think that's where leaders really come into play with making sure that those opportunity gaps are non-existent. I don't think we talk about race relations enough. I don't think we are as honest as we possibly can be about the impacts of race relations. I don't think we're really honest about our individual thoughts.
The entire community benefits when we close our achievement gaps and really openly and candidly talk about issues of race, issues of bias, and address those issues head on.
If you look at the state of our country today, with the attitude in Congress toward our president, the things that have happened in Ferguson, things that are happening today in Baltimore, we know that we are not a post-racial society.
Denver Public Schools was the first non-Southern school district where federally mandated busing was implemented. From 1974 through 1995, students were bused to achieve racial integration and equity for all students. Students from Denver Public Schools' northeast neighborhoods of Park Hill, Lowry, City Park West, and Whittier were the most impacted areas during busing.
Manual High School was a phenomenal high school while I attended there. It brought kids from all over the city, from every socioeconomic walk of life. Manual High School pulled from all different parts of our city. And then, of course, the surrounding communities of Manual High School, the Northeast, again, the Cole, the Whittier, the Five Points communities. When I sum up what happened and has happened at Manual High School, I gotta tell you, it's been very painful. One, because of the historic relevance and the success that the high school had prior to, the end of busing. It wasn't just white kids who were bused to Manual, it was all different shades of children who were bused to Manual High School. One of the things that we know happened is that the moment they ended busing, all the resources left.
Manual no longer had any kids from any other part of the city, and the school just went downhill.
And as we looked at the sort of natural boundaries and keeping the East High School boundaries the same, we saw that the boundaries of Manual was going to create a neighborhood school of almost entirely low income, new Latino immigrants who had not been there in the 60s, many of them new immigrants who didn't speak English. And this looked like a bad situation for a school. One of the options was a redrawing of the boundaries so that some of the students who were previously assigned to East would have been assigned to Manual. And that would have helped the Manual school not have such a concentration of low-income kids and would not have had the gang violence. Certainly, those who had traditionally been assigned to East High School, which was a very high-performing, popular school, still is today, did not want to go to Manual. And at the same time, we had members of the Manual neighborhood community clamoring not to change the boundary and saying, this is our neighborhood school, and we want it.
Manual is the perfect example of a city that's sort of divided between loving its traditional school and knowing something very fundamental has to change. So we've been through a number of principles, a number of models within Manual, and yet there's been almost no improvement, maybe a little bit of incremental improvement for the kids. We're starting another effort to reboot Manual, and somehow I don't think we know really what to do.
People will say that Manual struggled because when busing ended, you no longer had affluent white students coming in. And I always cringe when I hear people say that, because what you're really saying to that community is that you were only successful when we were able to bring the white kids in.
The district suffered greatly after busing, where we lost such a huge amount of enrollment and basically white middle class flight. And I think it took decades for the school district to recover from that.
East was never really affected by busing because East is naturally integrated by where it's located. So you get low-income kids and you get affluent kids just through the natural boundaries of the of the larger high school neighborhood. So there really were no changes at all.
I'm an East High graduate, and serving on the school board, I kind of knew the dirty little secret about all of our schools, but particularly a school like East, which was really segregated into the haves and have-nots. And I didn't understand and appreciate that as a student. I fully knew about that when I was on the board. So I didn't feel like I wanted my children to be in that environment perpetuating the haves and have-nots. And South High School's our home school, and then they chose East. And it's been a great program, actually, for them, in the same way that it was for my brother and me.
It's a public school that gets funneled with so many different type of students who come there. And of all the traditional public schools that I see for high schools, it's one of the few schools that I don't think can fail. Once you get within the school, there are schools within the school that are very hard realities. You know, some of their socioeconomic statuses wouldn't allow for them to have as much freedom within the school as many other students. But for me, that's what made East amazing, was that it introduced you to a world that wasn't perfect.
Of your traditional high school, neighborhood high school, they have had the most success over the years. They've been, generally the most integrated.
Despite being one of the top high schools in the district, East has a large achievement gap in reading. 33 and 39 percentage points separate Latino and Black students from their white counterparts.
My kids now, they're all in 3 different unique situations. My oldest, he is in middle school. He goes to a charter school. He also is impacted with autism. My 9-year-old, who attends an innovation elementary school. And then I have my daughter, who is a first grader who attends a private school for GT, gifted and talented children.
38% of white students in 3rd through 10th grade are in the Gifted and Talented program, compared to 15% of Latino students and 11% of Black students enrolled in GT. Cherry Creek School District has the next highest Black GT population, with 5.6% of Black students. Boulder Valley School District has the next highest Latino population, with 10%.
It has always struck me that the Gifted and Talented program, and in particular the one they call Highly Gifted and Talented in Denver, is more an effort to keep affluent white families in Denver public schools than it is an actual highly gifted program. It was always very disproportionately white and Asian kids. The class sizes were small. The teachers tended to be absolutely top-notch teachers. As a tool for equity, I would say the highly gifted program was going in pretty much the wrong direction.
When I took my daughter to testing for Denver Public Schools, I counted about 5 African American kids there. Why aren't we getting our children tested? A lot of parents don't know. It can also be taboo if you have a gifted child in the African American community, in the sense of, oh, well, they're doing fine. They're doing just fine in the classes that they're in. I'm not going to push them ahead.
As our kids come to us, the privileges that they have as young children matter. And those numbers show up in our Gifted and Talented numbers. Our Gifted and Talented program is way too highly skewed towards our white students as opposed to our students of color. That's true here. That's true we see in cities and areas across the country. And it's a result both, frankly, of some of the systemic biases that we have, and it's a result of the privileges that students of different races grew up with and bring with them when they first, for example, have the opportunity to be assessed for those programs at age 5.
One of DPS's strategies to increase school and student performance and diversity is to place schools that are high-performing and attractive to white families in traditional neighborhoods of color with chronically low-performing schools. One example is McAuliffe Middle School. In 2015, McAuliffe, an IB school originally located in Stapleton, moved to Smiley Middle School in Park Hill, which closed the year before. The 2 schools are night and day. Last year, McAuliffe composite reading and math scores were 89% and 84% proficient or better, respectively, while Smiley was 33% and 28% respectively. During its last year, Smiley was 84% Black and Latino, while McAuliffe was 59% white with 30% Black and Latino combined during the 2014 school year.
McAuliffe is currently one of the top 10 rated middle schools in the state of Colorado, and that's out of 505 middle schools. So, academically, I think we perform very well. Because we're not a charter, we cannot set a quota around race or socioeconomics. So we're just a general lottery. This past year was the first year where we did not have enough seats available to meet the demand of the community. For next school year in 2016, we'll have about 125 students that live in Park Hill and Stapleton that will be on our wait list, which has caused some consternation amongst families, especially those families that live really close to the school.
We just moved to Stapleton when we choiced McAuliffe. Not only was the curriculum great and right in line with what we saw in a middle school, another thing was that the fact that it was in close proximity to the home we were buying. Caitlin gets to ride her bike to school, or she can walk to school. I work, so it was really key for us to have her in a close distance so she could walk home, let herself in until we got home from work that day. And that's why we chose this area, because all of the schools are of high quality and we would have been fine with any of them.
Even though we have what I feel to be a diverse integrated school, if you were to walk into our cafeteria during lunch, you would see that kids are still sitting, for the most part, with peers that look like themselves and are from a similar socioeconomic background as well.
Although McAuliffe is one of the highest performing middle schools in the district, it has a significant achievement gap in reading. 29 and 48 percentage points separate Latino and Black students from their white counterparts.
Stapleton is, my guess is probably about 90% white. And my two boys go to Swaggart, which is a school that's majority white. And I think Isaac and Charlie are both among the only Black kids in their class.
So we live in Stapleton on the east side of Denver, where that sometimes the choices that you thought were available weren't always available. Right? So for both of our boys, we looked at Polaris, we looked at Odyssey School, which is a charter school here in Sedan, we looked at our neighborhood school. We liked all three of them, but they couldn't get into either Odyssey. They passed the admissions for Polaris, but they were out of neighborhood, so really weren't accessible. And so in the first round, what we thought would be an embarrassment of choices was actually just one choice. When you think about what is the opportunity in Northeast Denver, what is the opportunity to create a meaningful community experience where people have high quality schools that serve their neighborhood and their neighbors and that are incredibly diverse and give you the rich texture of what all of Denver feels like. The amazing thing is that's possible right now. If you crossed the street, if you crossed Montview from Stapleton to East Colfax, you would go from Bill Roberts to Ashley Elementary, and you would go from a school that's 80% white and non-free and reduced lunch to one that's 90+% Latino and free and reduced lunch. Those kids are in school a block apart. Same is true if you cross Quebec to the west. You would see in North Park Hill far more diverse communities of color in those elementaries than you'd see in Stapleton. The beauty of what I think Denver's trying to do and what we've pushed them to try to do is to say that re-segregation exists because of the way you've thought about neighborhoods in the past and the way those neighborhoods have led to enrollment zones in the past, which is, hey, if you live north of Montview, you are guaranteed a spot in a Stapleton school and you are a Stapleton resident, which means you're defining that neighborhood as the boundaries of Stapleton. I think the great promise of this Northeast Denver is you now have in Northeast Denver what everyone would want in any city. You have a combination of middle class, upper middle class, and working class families. You have a combination of white, Latino, and African American families. And if you drew that neighborhood to say include North Park Hill and East Colfax and Stapleton all as one zone, you would have a school distribution that everybody I think is seeking. A balance where no particular group feels like they're isolated or alone. But what it takes is convincing folks to think about themselves as neighbors in a region and not as neighbors in a block.
In the fall of 2015, we're going to open the first high school out at Stapleton, and it'll be partially built out. We'll be able to take in several hundred students, but by the time it's done, it's planned to be about a 900 student high school.
We need to make sure that we reserve a number of slots for children that come from free and reduced families. With that belief, we think that we're going to get the kind of racial and social diversity in the school. We start off there in order to social engineer some diversity.
So the original design of the Stapleton community was very courageous and very bold and said from the outset that our Stapleton community will integrate with and will be part of the broader community in which we're located. And that's been at the root of, for example, having at the middle school level a combined Greater Park Hill Stapleton enrollment zone, And that exact same philosophy has animated the design of the high school, and a commitment from the community to make sure that that high school will stay integrated. So that school is built to a size to be able to accommodate significant numbers of choice, to allow students from the immediately surrounding neighborhoods.
The guarantee is that we will have enough seats for all the families that want to choice into Northfield High today. We don't know what that looks like 5 years down the road, but we know that we have enough seats today for those families to get their choice into Northfield High School.
You have to make sure that there is both space in that school to serve all the kids that want to go there, and that there is a design to that school that best facilitates serving the kids that come. My opinion is it's going to be hard to build one 3,000 student comprehensive high school that will serve all the needs of those communities at the same time, and do it without recreating what we've seen in other cities, which is a heavily tracked high school that it appears to be integrated from the outside, but when you walk in, you see classrooms and cliques that actually belie that integration.
And if you look at the issues of racial misunderstanding and white cops shooting unarmed black men all the time, part of it is probably attributed to the fact that there's so little interaction between different groups of people, that they don't understand each other or fear each other and have misunderstandings that if they had grown up going to school together, they might have had it slightly different.
In comparing the 20 largest school districts in Colorado, 2 districts have made strong gains in closing the gaps for both Black and Latino students. Cherry Creek and Harrison school districts have instituted race awareness, increased AP class enrollment and preschool, as well as other tactics to create opportunities for its students of color.
One of the ways that we have decreased the ill performance or the poor performance of our preschool students is by partnering with one of our preschool partners in Colorado Springs.
In Cherry Creek, we've acknowledged that race is something that we need to look at. And within that context, we've talked about that institutional racism that you talk about. We speak about white privilege. We talk about our Black and brown students. We're very intentional in not clustering kids as minority, if you will. We're very specific about recognizing the impact of race.
And I say an opportunity gap because a part of our performance has been really centered around how are we providing better opportunities for the students that we serve. If we're looking at our advanced placement scores and our advanced placement data, and holistically we're seeing that Caucasian students are outperforming our Hispanic students or African American students. But when we also look at the number of students who are participating in those courses, we have many more Caucasian students participating in the course than African American and Hispanic students. So ultimately, we would expect that there's going to be a difference in their performance. But if we provide the opportunity for more Hispanic students and African American students to participate, then we can begin to truly measure if there's an achievement gap between those groups of students.
Well, what we do is encourage kids to get into AP, IB, and concurrent enrollment. You got to have classes that are rigorous at grade level at a minimum. Okay, I'm talking about kids being at a minimum at a grade level. And in Cherry Creek, when we talk about that grade level, it is a class that is intended to prepare that child for college and for success in whatever it is that they choose to do after high school.
We have released all criteria for students taking advanced placement courses. So previously, we had situations where students had to get teacher recommendation, students had to have a certain GPA in order to participate in advanced placement courses. We've done away with that. Any student has the opportunity.
20 years after the end of federally mandated busing to racially integrate Denver public schools, achievement gaps still exist for students of color. Although there is no silver bullet, many school districts, including Denver, are instituting policies to close the gap. From early childhood education and increasing AP enrollment to district-wide race training, progress is being made, albeit slow. Still, school districts face a long road ahead to eliminate the gap altogether and make the dream of complete equity for all students a reality.
I absolutely believe that across the country, in the state of Colorado, in any city, in any state in our country, we can fix the problem. We first have to acknowledge the problem, and then we have to strategize to see what we're going to do about the problem.
In my mind, this conversation is all about the different types of kids that we're not serving well. In some places, those are based on race and ethnicity. In most places, those are based on income.
I think the work is done when you're not talking about a gap, right? The reason that we're focusing on the gap is because you're saying it's not acceptable. It's not okay. And so when is that work done? That work is done when all of your students are performing at or about the same level, that there's no racial predictability with regards to performance, that any child can walk in regardless of race and perform at the same level as everybody else. I mean, that's when you're done.
We've got to connect the challenges we face in society back to what happens in those classrooms and the opportunities or lack thereof we give our young people to get ready. The reality is that our community is shifting. Our society is shifting. By 2030, this will be a nation of color. And if we don't prepare all children to hit the ground running to lead this nation, we're going to have much bigger conversations about a lot of other things on a more global scale. So it's important that we give every child the opportunity to succeed in this nation.